preparing for this job as a prosecutor. By example, and we've been successful. Our crime rates are down, and Governor Ron DeSantis has recognized our office.
All right. I wanted to go live at 7:00 because WMBB right now has the debate between incumbent Larry Basford and Eric Garmon. And what I want to do is turn it on and watch it with you. So here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Basford. Mr. Garmon, go ahead with your opening statement.
Thanks for having me, Tom. What I would like to say first and foremost is to everybody out there, I know it's been a very hard week, both nationally and locally. My thoughts and prayers go out to the Petronas family. With that being said, my name is Eric Garmon. I'm running to be your state attorney. I do also have some experience. It's different than Larry's, and I think it's important. And I think I'm glad that we have tonight to go into that a little bit more. Where I don't have prosecutorial experience, I do have experience as an investigator or training officer and many other roles in the police departments, building cases from the ground up, from the bottom up, as my opponent would say. And then I went from there and I joined before that, I joined the United States Marine Corps right out of high school. And in this position, leadership very much does matter. But leadership is more than just being elected to a position, placed in a position, or otherwise. And leadership is one thing that the Marine Corps does teach you well as the police force. I would like to take the skills that I have to bring the 14th Judicial Circuit to a more even playing field for everyone. And I humbly ask for your vote on or before August 20th, and hopefully we'll get in tonight some reasons why that would be the case.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm going to start just by saying, Mr. Basford, do not tell me why he should not be the state attorney. Tell me why you should be.
Well, as I indicated before, Tom, I've been training for this position for over 30 years. I've got over 260 trials that I've tried, as well as 60 cases that involved homicides. This allows me, as I talked about just a few moments earlier, to lead by example, to mentor and train the younger attorneys that we have there at the state attorney's office, as well as the seasoned attorneys that we have there. I've tried every type of case that you can imagine, from misdemeanors all the way up to first-degree murder cases where I have sought and obtained the death penalty. I've also supervised 30 attorneys, another 70 people as support staff positions, managed a budget of over $11 million, and also created programs that I think makes us more accountable to the public. For instance, our critical incident review team, that's a program that I created. It involves our seasoned prosecutors and investigators with over 250 years of experience. We look at all cases involving the officer's deadly use of force and other homicide cases. In addition to that, we have expanded our diversion programs while I've been there. We created a construction fraud task force. And if you're going to lead people, okay, you've got to know where you're going and how to get there. As a prosecutor, I can still lead and mentor the prosecutors, not only with the new prosecutors, but the ones that have 7 years of experience, 15 years of experience, 30 years of experience. We are a team there at the state attorney's office, and they need a leader. The state attorney is more than just a manager. You have to understand the dynamics involved in working with law enforcement. We have a great partnership with all of the sheriffs and the law enforcement agencies that work in the 14th Circuit. And the statistic that I was talking about earlier, being number one when it comes to sending dangerous criminals to prison and enforcing the law, that is because of our great working relationship with law enforcement and the team atmosphere, teamwork that we have with them and in our office. When we go to court, we go as a team, and I'm the leader of that team.
Okay, Mr. Basford. Mr. Garmon, same question to you. Why should you be the state attorney?
Well, Tom, again, leadership is very important, and leadership is, in fact, more than just being a manager. Leadership is sometimes being willing to be the one not invited to dinner. It is the person who sometimes, as any good friend or any good manager or leader, the person who will tell you what you do not want to hear or what you're not really ready to hear. A good example of that is we should have a very close relationship with law enforcement. I can tell you, being in law enforcement in one way or another since 2005, I've seen a lot of different administrations come and go. I've seen a lot of similarities, and I've seen a lot of things repeating patterns. And one of those is still cops contact me. I had some contact me earlier today. I don't even know who to call. So it's more than just being a good friend or a good acquaintance or a good partner with the police chief. It's being a good partner for every single officer down the line. A good example of that is one of the main things that we have to do is not just simply go in and prosecute cases. And what I would tell you is, I agree with Larry. We have a fantastic team of people at State Attorney's Office. But with that being said, there are some simple things that really it falls on the leader of the agency. And that is, first and foremost, Brady letters, right? And for those who don't know, if there's possibly exculpatory or evidence that might sway the jury or the fact finder away from prosecution or otherwise, we have to let them know that. A good example is a Panama City Beach Police Department officer last September was fired. He was fired for lying multiple times. It was not a secret. It was very well known. But because there's not a direct line, a direct liaison line, the Brady letter for that, that we have an officer who is a multiple time punished and fired for lying and dishonesty, we're still prosecuting his cases. And we were until about a week ago. So the letter warning everybody that we have an errant officer went out almost a year later. We owe it to the officers out there doing it correctly. We owe it to the citizens, and we owe it to everyone else in the 14th Judicial Circuit to proactively say, hey, Chief, what's going on? Is there anything I need to know about? Because at the end of the day, that's part of preparing for trial, and that's part of preparing for trial properly. It also means conflicting when you should conflict, whether it's a small conflict or not. Even the appearance of bias can be a very harmful thing, not only in one case, but ongoing. A great example of this is if your son and daughter-in-law are primary case agents in making thousands, hundreds of cases a year, you probably, the prosecutor working that case probably is not going to feel that they have the complete, free, unfettered position to do what they need to do. And to my knowledge, there's never been a conflict on any case between Mr. Basford and his son and his daughter-in-law. So it's being willing to sit and do what may not be popular, but what is in fact right.
Okay, yeah, you kind of got a little off tangent because I wanted you to tell me why you should be state attorney as opposed to sort of hammering some of the issues that Mr. Basford has. But since we've gone that direction, I'm going to give Mr. Basford a chance to respond to some of the things you've just said. So, Mr. Basford, go right ahead.
Thank you, Tom. For instance, this issue that Mr. Garmon has talked about on the Brady letter, that was a breakdown in communication with that agency and us. We have a policy in effect that whenever there is a disparaging information, Brady information about an officer, whether that's being fired or reprimanded or suspended, they are supposed to notify us. As soon as this came to our attention, I got on the phone and talked with the chief of police out there at the Panama City Police Department, and he acknowledged that this was just a breakdown in communication and they had not notified us.
Was it the beach or was it Panama City?
I think the one that he's talking about is the beach.
Is the beach. Okay. You
Yes,
just
sir.
said Panama City.
Yes, it is the beach.
Yeah.
Excuse
Okay.
me. In regard to the number of cases that we prosecute, we do conflict out on cases where we believe that it would be appropriate to do so. Each year we prosecute about 18,000 cases. Okay. I'm not involved in the prosecution of all 18,000 cases. That would be impossible for me to do. Our prosecutors are, our vision is to make sure that we seek justice in every case. And that's what we do. We make our decisions based on the facts, on the law, and on our desire to keep our community safe.
It's kind of easy. I won't say easy, but it's easy for you, Mr. Garmon, to attack his record because he has the record. And at this point, you don't have one. 4 years from now, if you were to have the office, you're probably going to be faced with the same sort of thing. What is it about what's happening in the state attorney's office, or at least in your mind, what's happening in the state attorney's office, it makes you want to get this job.
Sure. And my answer is going to be very much the same. That's why I should be the state attorney, is that I'm not afraid to do what needs to be done when it's time to do that. Again, I have not only the leadership skills, but, I've been a business owner, and I've been a business owner since 2011, law firm owner since 2017. And what I can tell you is being a leader and being the head of the agency, or if you would, the managing partner of a very large firm, is all about taking issues that you either don't know or need to know better and putting the people in place that know those. For instance, there's supposed to be a specifically designated domestic violence prosecutor. That's not always going to be the head of the agency, of course not. But no different with major crimes or otherwise. It is about being able to put the people in place and put them there and keep them there, retain that talent, attract that talent, and just make sure, again, that you do the right thing. Because when you do not, the cost of that is very heavy. It's very costly to retry cases. It's very costly to come back on appeal. But more than the financial cost, a lot of times, and Mr. Hess before Mr. Basford, and Mr. Basford, I'm sure would agree that the avalanche, I believe it was called by Mr. Hess, of body camera, for instance, is enormous, but we can't ignore it. And many times you'll have exculpatory evidence or evidence that would possibly help a case. And if we're not looking at that till months and months later, it's just doing a disservice to everybody. So it's being willing to do things a little different. Look, things have changed a lot. And though Mr. Basford's been at that office a lot, the world is changing, as is the way that we hire, fire, and manage people. So we need to be able to change with that workforce. But more importantly, it's just being able to do the right thing no matter what. And what I would tell you is, whether it's 18,000 cases or 2 cases, if I have a conflict of interest, I'm going to conflict off the case. It's just that simple. It's not a deflection. It's really not an attack. I'm willing to do what's unpopular, even if it's 18,000 times.
You sounded as though you were, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded to me like you were just saying things have changed, the world's changed, that Mr. Basford is too old for this job. Is that a little too simplistic, or is that what you're saying?
I would say that is too simplistic. I can tell you, being a business owner, just attracting and retaining talent has drastically changed in the last 10 years. And kind of where a lot of that comment can come from is, again, if we want to get the absolute best, we're going to have to go to them. Used to, people just were like happy to have the job. They would come to you in a sense, but to get the best talent, and that's what we need here. I mean, we've got the world's most beautiful beaches. We've got great salaries. We've got everything, but it's not the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. You have to go to them, and you have to be willing to put that work in, is a great example of what I was talking about.
Mr. Basford, I'll give you a chance to respond to that, please.
Well, I'm certainly not going to use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him in this campaign. That will be for the voters to decide. But for instance, I have yet to hear how he can improve on being number 1 in the state out of all the 20 state attorneys in sending dangerous people to prison. And that's what part of my job is to make sure dangerous people go to prison and that we follow the law. Or our office has also been recognized as being number 1 in clearance rates. That means in effectively and efficiently prosecuting cases in a timely manner. I haven't heard any of that. He seems like he wants to try to deflect the issues on other things. Leadership, well, I'm the leader of the team there at the state attorney's office. We know where we're going, and I can mentor the people that are there at the state attorney's office.
Is it fair to say that recruiting is an issue at your office?
Yes, recruiting is an issue throughout the United States. Every state attorney in Florida, as well as every public defender, not just in Florida, but in the entire United States, are facing these problems with people wanting to be public servants and go into this type of work. We've had turnover at the state attorney's office ever since I've been there for the last 30 years, and we will have that forever. Part of that reason is because we are great training grounds for future lawyers and future private litigators. If you look at the circuit judges that we have 13 circuit judges. 7 of those have prosecutorial experience. We get lawyers out of law school. They come here, they work for us 2 to 3 years, and then they go on to making bigger money and working with law firms like Perry and Young or Morgan and Morgan, where they can sometimes work at home. They can make a lot more money than they make at the state attorney's office, and they have less stress than they have at the state attorney's office. So yes, turnover is always going to be a problem. That's why it's important to have somebody with experience, prosecutorial experience, somebody that can teach a young prosecutor and mentor older prosecutors, because we're going to have turnover, as opposed to someone who has never tried one single case as a prosecutor. How are they supposed to mentor and teach and guide people who have more experience? Well, we have misdemeanor attorneys that have been with us less than a year that has more experience in the courtroom than my opponent.
Mr. Garmon, your response to that?
Sure. Just as Larry is graciously not going to hold my lack of years against me, I won't hold his lack of diversity against him. With that being said, saying that there are people there for less than a year that have more experience than me is just absolutely false. I have trial experience both in the civil world and in the criminal world. But with that being said, again, it is important to have prosecutorial experience, but it's important also to you always want to hire somebody smarter than you, better than you, and otherwise. And it's also important that, yes, we are going to have turnover, but when we lost 5 people in a week in the last year, one went to the public defender's office to make less money. One moved to South Florida to a prosecutor's office to make less money. These people are not just leaving for Perry and Young's and otherwise. They're leaving because of breakdowns in leadership. Now, with that being said, I'm also in that situation. When Mr. Basford came in, when he won office there towards the end and waiting on that period, he was the chief prosecutor. He got to start calling shots. And then when in January, he was there. He took the most seasoned prosecutor at the office, Bob Sompathy, who had a 30-0 record, no murder losses, but possibly had some ambition, and completely inexplicably, he is now not at the office. That is not leadership, even if you may not get along. What I would tell you is, Larry and I don't really know each other, but I would keep him on because he is a good prosecutor. I'm not saying he's not a bad I'm not saying he's a bad prosecutor. I'm saying that he's not a good manager. And as far as, well, what about the numbers from Ron DeSantis? Well, those are from your prosecutors. Those are not from you. I would challenge you to give me the number of cases you've tried since becoming a state attorney, and I would tell you it's probably your people, not you. A leader would acknowledge that from the start. But more than that, it's by not doing things properly and rushing things. Yes, you were recognized for Ron DeSantis, but you also had 10 people released from prison in one swath. And that is an officer that, talking about Brady letters, there was an incident that you weren't following up on, that a Brady letter never went pinned when drugs were found on a desk. And that officer was the primary witness, and a case was taken to trial less than a month after that, and it got called back. That trial should have been delayed. Again, is that popular? It's not. Is it the right thing to do? It is. So having a prosecutorial experience is great, but it's also having the wherewithal to do the right thing that's more important.
Response, Mr. Basford?
Yes. While I've been state attorney, I personally have tried 2 double homicide cases. That is cases where we had multiple victims. In addition to that, I've also handled 3 cases that involved resentencing hearings on people that were on death row that had to be resentenced because of a change in the case law. We have sent those individuals back to death row. We are currently preparing for a case for trial, and at this point it would be not proper for me to comment on the facts of that case, but that is also another resentencing case where an individual, we hope to put him back on death row where he currently is. So I have led by example, and I intend to continue to do that as long as I am the state attorney.
We'll change the topic. I'm going to give you both a hypothetical. This county went through a pretty traumatic situation after the hurricane with the discovery of corruption in the city of Lynn Haven. The case was actually being originally investigated as a local case. And for a number of reasons, the feds got involved. I'm curious, state laws were broken. How would you have would you have prosecuted on a state level, Mr. Garmon, if you'd been in this position?
It's difficult to answer that hypothetical because it would depend on if I had a conflict or not. If I had a conflict on the case, I would absolutely bring the case to where it needed to be and then certify that conflict. But the easiest answer is absolutely. If there was a case that I had the ability and I had no conflict to bring forward, I would absolutely bring it forward. Justice should be equal, regardless of your position, who you worship with, what your last name is, or otherwise. And there's really you don't need to get too deeply into that. The answer is absolutely.
Mr. Basford.
If state laws had been broken, we would have prosecuted those unless there was a clear conflict of interest. In this case, the reason that this was prosecuted by the federal authorities is because it involved FEMA money, which is federal funds. And that's the reason that the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office proceeded with the investigation and prosecution of this case.
But there were other things. There were bribery charges that happened on a local level, didn't involve FEMA money. There was a number of local issues that were at question there. And that's a lot of people, a lot of us, a lot of people in this office, I'll say, who followed that case very, very closely, and we reported extensively on it, could never understand why the federal case was the end all be all and there was no other state charges there.
Well, Tom, as you know, there were some state charges filed in that case. In fact, we had to conflict out of one of those prosecutions that was prosecuted by a special prosecutor appointed by the governor. And then we, in fact, prosecuted one or more of those local state charges.
Okay. Just one that I've always wanted to ask. Mr. Garmon, you got something you want to
Tom,
follow up on?
I think it's important to point out that it's not just there. We're not necessarily past our window of time. So for an elected official on corruption and other charges, some of those statute of limitations start after they leave office. So it is a thing. We've got investigators at the state attorney's office, and I believe there are some cases that should be looked into that we still have time under statutory law to look into.
Well, without naming a bunch of cases, I don't really think it's fair for me to turn around and hold Mr. Basford to task for that I'm not sure what we're talking about. Do you want to go ahead and name some cases here, Mr. Garmon?
It would be whatever law enforcement partners bring before us, but I'm
Okay.
just letting you know
Okay,
our time
All
is not passed on some
right.
of the,
Mr. Basford,
depending on
to my
what it
day-
is.
Are there stones out there unturned or not?
None that I'm aware of, Tom.
Okay.
Again, if law enforcement brings those cases to us, or if citizens bring those cases to us, then we would certainly look at those.
Okay. Mr. Garmon, in some of the past debates, you've made a pretty big issue of either recusing oneself for a conflict of interest, or maybe recusing oneself too quickly. Is that correct? Am I down the right path there with this?
If you have a conflict, there's no such thing as too quickly. But what you want to make sure is, for instance, if it's a name, is it the same exact individual? So, I mean, you want to see the name and instantly do it. But if it's somebody that you know for sure who it is, and you know the relationship you have with them or their child, or, whatever the conflict may be, we need to conflict off that as soon as possible, because even the appearance of impropriety can cause a serious conflict. So we want to do that as expeditiously as we can.
I know of a number of times you have exercised that option, Mr. Basford. Can you think of one where you might have, or Mr. Garmon is pointing towards that maybe you should have recused yourself or asked for a special prosecutor, or are there any of those circumstances out there?
Not that I'm familiar with. I mean, if we believe that there's a conflict either because of my position or a relative of the state attorney, then certainly state attorney employees, then we look at that and we make a decision whether or not we should continue to handle the case or it should be conflicted out. And we always err on the side of caution to avoid the appearance of impropriety.
Mr. Basford, Mr. Garmon's made an issue out of your son working, I guess, correct me if I'm mistaken, I think he works with Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And he's made an issue of that about your attorneys maybe not being comfortable handling cases that he's involved in. Is that an issue?
It's not an issue at our office, okay? Tom, as I indicated before, we have about 18,000 cases every year that comes into our office. That's 12,000 cases circuit-wide misdemeanor cases, and then another 6,000 felony cases. In Bay County, I believe those numbers run somewhere about 8,000 misdemeanor cases and then 4,100 felony cases. When my son or my daughter-in-law makes a case, I don't even know about those cases most of the time. And they are reviewed by the prosecutor that is assigned to those cases. And that prosecutor reports to their supervisor. We have a misdemeanor supervisor, Bob Pale. Many times I don't even know what cases they have made and how those cases are resolved.
Mr. Garmon, are you aware of any issue in that regard?
Absolutely.
Tell me.
Absolutely. The fact that my opponent doesn't believe it to be an issue is the issue. Conflicts of interest are not just direct, actual, and right out in your face. They're also any potential conflicts of interest. So again, let's take the prosecutor out of it. If you're the person being prosecuted and you see Basford and there's another Basford, the fact that you probably don't think you're getting a fair shake. And again, I would say that if we're speaking in actual reality, especially a brand new younger prosecutor at the misdemeanor level, I doubt highly that they truly have freedom and they really believe that they can conflict when they need to. And the fact that they then have to go to a misdemeanor prosecutor to ask if they can conflict is an issue. They know ethics. They know what they believe to be conflict and not. It's not something you should have to run up the flagpole. If you believe that you have a conflict or that there is one, you should be able to certify it. But as far as no direct examples of conflict, in the Hoot Crawford case, okay, when the Bay County Sheriff's Office had pulled over, deposition, or for those who don't know what that is, an interview under oath, the lieutenant from the Sheriff's Office called the state attorney's office. And in that deposition, they said that they spoke to Mr. Basford, who said, yes, go ahead and make that arrest. Now, all of the judges in the circuit conflicted because of the long-standing nature of Mr. Crawford in the circuit. I would say that Mr. Basford has that same relationship, but if what the court documents say are true, then there's an even larger issue that he gave the command to arrest, or at least the okay. There's no way that does not rise to the level of a conflict.
If I could respond to that, Tom. First of all, yes, we do supervise our misdemeanor attorneys, and there again goes the lack of experience in this. When someone comes to work at the state attorney's office, they are giving a tremendous amount of discretion, but they are supervised by an attorney who has 30 years of experience, and because his job is to lead and mentor those people to make sure they're using that discretion wisely. In regard to the Hoot Crawford case, who was he really representing? Was he representing the victim, the child victim in the case, or was he really representing the person who was accused of committing the crime against the victim? In this case, law enforcement and the Department of Children and Family Services, whenever they receive a report that a child has been abused, they have an absolute duty to investigate that case. And that's what they did in this case. During their investigation, they made a determination that this child victim needed to be taken into protective custody to prevent further exposure to the person who had abused her and to prevent any harm. Now, law enforcement and the Department of Children and Family Services use extreme caution when investigating these cases, because if they don't, there could be more harm or more abuse to a victim. In this case, the attorney interfered with the investigation of this child abuse case. He was arrested. He was tried by a jury and convicted for interfering with the taken into custody, as well as tampering a witness. Now, as far as a conflict of interest, I don't see where there was a conflict of interest. He was a defense attorney. In the past, we have prosecuted attorneys who committed crimes, and we were not going to let the fact that he was an attorney merely cause a conflict of interest with our office.
Do you agree, disagree with that, Mr. Garmon?
Well, Mr. Basford talks about deflection. That was a masterclass. In the court documents, it says that the sheriff's office called Mr. Basford, not Mr. Basford's office. And Mr. Basford said, yes, arrest him. If you give the order or the authorization to arrest, there is nothing. I don't care what a jury does later. I don't care what the facts are. You yourself are conflicted. Now, if those facts end up coming before a jury or a prosecutor that doesn't have a conflict of interest, be that what it may, that's fine. But when you yourself say, yes, go ahead and arrest, you have an absolute conflict.
There you go. Could I respond to that, Tom?
Yeah, well, but I want to ask you a question. What was that conversation like? I mean, he's describing a conversation that he says he's privy to, or he understands. I guess there's court records of that.
Yes.
Was the court records accurate? Is that how the conversation?
Yes. The officers called us up and briefed us on the situation. Okay. I was in a meeting with Mr. Mark Graham, my Bay County Chief Assistant, as well as Peter Overstreet, who is our major crimes leader. And I believe Mr. Hess was in the office that day preparing another case. We listened to what the officer said, and it was the consensus. And I ultimately made the decision that, yes, we were going to prosecute, we were going to authorize the arrest, because we were not going to let an attorney do something with a child that we would not allow a parent of a child to do. This shows the inexperience of my opponent over there when he says anytime that I authorize an arrest that we should conflict out of cases. Many times when officers are investigating complex cases, whether they're white-collar crime cases or homicide cases, for instance, these cases where drug dealers are selling or delivering drugs that cause overdose deaths, and then we're looking at prosecuting those for manslaughter or murder, we consult and advise law enforcement when they have sufficient evidence to go forward to make an arrest. Under the scenario or hypothetical that he gives, in all of those cases, I have a conflict. That's just not the way things work in the state of Florida in this office. It's not the way they work in any prosecutor's office in the United States.
Mr. Garmon, anything more on this before we put this one to bed?
Sure. The difference between the drug dealers, the white collar criminals, and all that is they're not your declared and openly announced political opponent. Okay. This is not just a normal person. And what I would say is, again, we're trying to do integrity of trials. I am not, as my opponent tries to paint it, saying that he should have been arrested or not. I'm saying that if you make that call, that's fine to advise law enforcement. That's part of your job. But when it's a known political opponent, let someone else prosecute that case.
Tom, again, that's just fake news. That's false. Okay. The only political opponents that I've had as state attorney have been has been Wes Hatcher back in 2020. He was not arrested or prosecuted. And the man sitting across from me, and to my knowledge, he's never been arrested or prosecuted. I never knew that Mr. Crawford had any ambitions of running for state attorney until after he was arrested. And I'm not going to let an attorney or anyone else create a conflict or try to create a conflict when one actually doesn't exist.
Okay. You started to mention the name Greg Wilson there.
Yes.
I would think most people would. And he did run, did he not?
He did run.
And
Greg Wilson was a political opponent of Mr. Hess when he was in office. Yes.
I'm sorry. It was before you had office. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask another question here that I'm going to give both of you the chance to answer. And I don't think I've asked this yet, but I think you've given me a lot of those answers. But tell me why your opponent should not be in this office? We'll start with you, Mr. Garmon.
Sure, it goes down to leadership. Again, it goes down to making the hard calls. It's easy to make the easy calls, right? But a good example as far as acting as a leader. Now, there's a case, the Mike Gordon case. And regardless of which side you fall on, whether you think he's innocent or guilty, really doesn't matter. What matters is when that case came in, the assigned assistant state attorney looked at the case and said, gee, I really think this looks political. I have the Bay County Sheriff's Office telling me one thing. They're upset that anything's happening. And I have the Lynn Haven Police Department telling me another. That assistant state attorney penned a memo directly to Mr. Basford saying, this is over my pay grade. I need help. I need advice. What in the world can I do? To my knowledge, unless there's a record that hasn't been produced in the request, that letter was never answered. And in fact, 2.5 years later and multiple prosecutors later, they believed it prudent enough to keep the case and file the case. And when a motion to dismiss was filed, they didn't even answer it. So the case was dismissed because the office did not even answer the motion to dismiss, which was brought before the court. Again, pointing to it being one way or another political. But when your assistant state attorney, and by the way, this assistant state attorney had many years of experience, but it was a very large issue. A leader would take a stand. Now, you're probably, again, you've got the sheriff's office and the Lynn Haven Police Department. We know that Mr. Basford was friends with the Lynn Haven Police Chief because he conflicted off of a case. He didn't conflict off the case that his son had at the exact same time. But at the end of the day, he'll conflict off on a case when he wants to. That should have directly been addressed. And that could have been case number 6 that he could have handled or tried, because the assistant state attorney was saying, this is above my pay grade. I don't know what to do here. And they were just left with no answer.
What is this case?
That's the Mike Gordon case.
What tells the particulars? Because most people do not know what you're
Sure.
speaking of.
So there was allegations of unlicensed contracting. Mr. Gordon was the building official and inspector. I don't know if he was still for the beach at the time, but the city of Lynn Haven.
Okay, I'm familiar with this. We did the story about it. I remember this now. Okay, sorry. Mr. Basford, what is there credence of what he's saying?
Well, am I going to get an opportunity to answer why I'm more qualified than my opponent?
Yeah, absolutely.
But first, I would like to respond to some of the things that he said.
And that's fine.
All right. We did discuss this issue with the prosecutor who had the case at the time, and she had been prosecuting, I think, for a couple of years, okay, although she had been an attorney for a number of years. All right. The decision was made to go forward with the prosecution based on the facts that we had at our disposal at the time. It's not uncommon for one agency to feel one way and another agency to feel another way, but that doesn't create a conflict, and it didn't create a conflict in this case. Later, as we moved along the case and the discovery was had in this case, when we would take depositions, the case seemed to fall apart, and that's the reason it was ultimately dismissed by the court. In regard to the other issue, I'm trying to remember what that was right now. Well, I'll just answer the question. And I believe the question is, why am I a better candidate?
Why should he not be the state attorney?
Well, it's pretty simple. Okay. He talks about his experience, but really when you come down to it, he has no experience as a prosecutor. Not one single case has he ever tried. How is he supposed to try and lead and mentor a team of experienced attorneys to do their job? It's been my experience that people want a leader who knows how to get the job done. My record is for everyone to see. Experienced prosecutor, a record of having an office that upholds the law, who treats everyone equitably and fairly, as well as protecting the innocent while convicting the guilty. On the other hand, well, I'm not going to disparage my opponent, but I think the voters will look at I hope they will look at the experience that the two candidates have. Who has over 30 years of experience of working to keep our families and communities safe, and a proven record of success, as opposed to someone who doesn't? I have not heard anything during our discussion tonight on how he can improve on being number one in sending dangerous criminals to prison, on how he can improve on being number one in clearance rates in the state attorney's office in the state of Florida. I haven't heard anything about that. I've only heard criticism about a couple of cases out of the 18,000. All cases are important, okay? And when we discover discrepancies in cases, we take the appropriate action. Our office and our mission, as I stated at the beginning of the interview tonight, is to uphold the public trust, to protect our community, and to enforce the law. We've done that, and we are on record of keeping our families safe.
We're going to wrap it up. Mr. Garmon, I'm going to give you a minute or two to just tell us anything, to tell the voters anything you'd like them to know about you, about voting for you, about this race, anything you want to know. What would you like to say?
Well, it's the honor of a lifetime to have the freedom in America to seek public office. So first and foremost, just thank you everybody for your outpouring of support. And again, yes, there is a stark contrast. My opponent and I agree. It's more than just being in an office for X amount of years. It's knowing that the person in that office is going to do the right thing. It's more than just, for instance, my opponent loves to say that he helped create alternative treatment courts. Currently in the 6-county area, there are 7 people in the Veterans Court. It's more than just creating something or being there. It's taking action. And we need somebody that's willing to do that, even when it's unpopular. You can go to Garmon2024.com to learn more. I'm also on Facebook. And I would love to speak with anybody that would like to know more about me, more about my experience. And I would humbly ask for your vote on or before August 20th.
All right, Mr. Garmon. Mr. Basford, you get the last word.
Thank you. As a prosecutor for over 30 years, I've spent my entire legal career, almost my entire legal career, of protecting and serving the people, the citizens of the 14th Judicial Circuit. It's been an honor to serve as a prosecutor and a double honor to serve as the state attorney. This is a tremendous job with tremendous responsibility, and it requires making decisions every day, work in the mornings. And I think people need to ask themselves, heaven forbid that they or a member of their family is the victim of a serious crime. Would you want an experienced prosecutor, someone that has prosecuted cases like that, whether that be, well, the most serious case that you can think of, a homicide case? Would you want somebody in charge of the state attorney's office who's been there, done that, and been successful leading and mentoring, if not himself personally trying that case? Or would you want somebody who has never prosecuted a simple petty theft case to be in charge of that type of prosecution? I'm the experienced prosecutor with a proven record of keeping our families and our communities safe. As long as I'm in this office, I will continue to do that and make sure that everyone is treated fairly and equitably. I would humbly appreciate your vote on or before August the 20th. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you participating in this evening. It's never easy to have verbal arguments over something like this. I'm kind of hoping that if both of you are angry at me or both of you are pleased with me, that I've done my job right. And that's all that really matters at this point, as we try to do a fair job here and present the issues that voters are going to need to know before they go make a decision. I thank you again for being here with us this evening. You've been listening to the 14th Judicial Circuit candidates debating.
Wow. That was really more interesting than you might realize. And I'll tell you why. I wrote down some very significant things. Wow. This is the most important race. I mean, as I told you, or as I put this banner up earlier, I want to remind you, the state attorney is the top prosecutor in a 6-county area. In this case, Bay County, Gulf, Jackson, Washington, Calhoun, and Holmes County. if you are arrested, that is who will decide whether or not you get prosecuted and how hard they come after you. And even more than that, the old guy, the incumbent, Larry Basford, along with Sheriff Tommy Ford, they'll throw you in the jail and you won't even get to talk to a public defender for possibly months for little crimes, even if it's a wrongful arrest. What Eric Garmon wants to do is bring in what he calls an intake prosecutor so that any arrest is immediately vetted. Is there a video to look at so somebody doesn't have to crowd the jail and have their liberty stolen for months, possibly? Or on the flip side, and equally as important, if there is a serious crime committed, are they going to have the proper prosecution to keep somebody in prison that deserves and needs to be in prison? But there's even more. Some of the things that the incumbent Larry Basford said were shocking, especially with regard to Hoot Crawford. And I'm going to share exactly what they are with you in a moment. And I'm going to tell you I'm going to give Tom Huey Lewis in the news director for WMBB, I'm going to give him a grade on this interview. And then there's something else, an overarching theme that this interview signals to me. I got a few things to tell you right after this. Remember also the county commission race next month. Incumbent Tommy Ham wants you to vote for a third term. Everybody knows Tommy Ham's got to go. There's a much better choice.
Strong, effective leadership. 3 words that could mean the difference between prison and your freedom. I'm Al Saulene, your Panama City Beach lawyer. 850-215-0628.
Don't let back pain and neck pain get you down. Find relief at Brown Chiropractic Center on St. Andrews Boulevard in Panama City. Dr. Sherry Brown helps people heal naturally with chiropractic adjustments and deep tissue massage. Call 769-3777. All right. So I actually think this is the best I've ever seen Tom Lewis do, challenging an incumbent like that. He started off basically arguing with Eric Garmon, the challenger, which was completely out of line for what his role is there. And then for the rest of the interview, he asked really tough questions like, hey, there were state laws broken by elected officials after Hurricane Michael. We reported many of them, and none of them were arrested or prosecuted. What gives? Wow. And he asked him several other tough questions. When Eric Garmon brought up, for example, that Larry Basford, the incumbent top prosecutor, arrested his political rival, Hoot Crawford, who made it known that he wanted to run for office. My God, when Hoot Crawford was representing a 16-year-old girl as a Marcy's Law attorney, in Florida, there's something known as Marcy's Law. It's a constitutional amendment a couple of years ago that was added, and what it basically says is that if you're a victim of a crime, you are entitled to an attorney the same way that the defendant is. If you're the victim of a crime, let's say you're assaulted or a victim of domestic violence, whatever, your voice deserves to be heard. You deserve to be involved in the process every step of the way. And we don't know how it works. Victims don't know how it works. That's why they're entitled to an attorney. And an attorney represents them and ensures that the victim is getting the services and the dignity that a victim deserves. That's what a Marcy's Law attorney does. And the most shocking thing I heard tonight was the incumbent top prosecutor who authorized the arrest of his political rival, Crawford. I mean, it's just like what you see in national news. This was a warning to defense attorneys. If you're going to say you run against me, and you better be careful. If you're going to be somebody we don't like around here, you better be careful. And the sheriff's office colluded with the state attorney's office, and they arrested a Marcy's Law attorney for doing his job. They arrested him for taking his own client out of the lawful custody of the state. But the problem was she was in the lawful custody of her own parents. She was the victim of, by the way, this is all, it's so ugly. I hate talking about it. She was a 16-year-old teenage victim. Her biological father had sexually assaulted her when she was tiny, and he went to prison for it. And then she got in an argument when she was 16 with her brother who lived in another state. And she got mad at him and told authorities, and told her parents and her psychiatrist, her therapist, that he had threatened her. He was in another state. And then she said, no, it didn't really, that didn't happen. You know, she was she's a 16-year-old teenage girl going through a tough time. And she got herself in a tough situation. And then her parents got her an attorney so she could go to a voluntary interview a couple of years ago at the Children's Advocacy Center. And he was representing her, Larry Basford's political rival. And they said that she was in danger at the safe space, the Children's Advocacy Center, with her attorney, with her parents, and with the sheriff's office there. They were mad because her attorney, she didn't want her attorney to leave her side because some of the men at the sheriff's office, specifically investigator Fondren, wanted to get her alone in a room and interrogate her at a voluntary interview without her attorney by her side. Then he calls his supervisor, Lieutenant Mathis, who shows up screaming and yelling that they're going to call DCF and have everybody thrown out and take the girl so they can question her without her attorney, which they did. Then they used that information, attorney-client privilege, that they had talked about before, and they got a corrupt bum judge by the name of Kelvin C. Wells to use attorney-client privilege as evidence that he tampered with a victim, which was a specific intent crime, meaning there had to be a name of a victim. There was never the name of a victim, ever, because there was no victim. Then the judge, Kelvin C. Wells, said, we're not going to talk about whether or not the attorney, Crawford, took his client from the lawful custody of the state when the state never had lawful custody of her. The judge said the jury will never hear that. And they didn't. It is the most shocking case I've ever seen. And Eric Garmon just brought that up. But now that I gave you the rundown, watch that interview again and listen to what the top prosecutor said. He said, who was Crawford representing? Was he representing the 16-year-old girl, or was he representing the perpetrator? What? He was clearly representing the 16-year-old girl. By the way, yeah, I'm going to say it. The family, the 16-year-old girl is now an adult. And her family, they have both filed notices of intent to sue sheriff's office, the state attorney, and all of those who lied and hurt her and snatched her away from her attorney and her parents and violated her rights to have an attorney. So the truth's going to come out in that case down the road. The truth's going to come out. The state, being Larry Basford and Sheriff Ford and their people, they did not help that teenage girl. They hurt that teenage girl. They terrorized that teenage girl, and they arrested her attorney. And then the judge told the jury that they're not allowed to hear what really happened. It's unbelievable. And by the way, Hoot Crawford was found guilty by a jury of 6 because the judge said if the girl was under 18 and if the girl left with Hoot Crawford, if he took her, and if the state just declared that they had taken her, he's guilty. That would be like you having your car seized because they got a warrant. Okay? They got a warrant. And then you go to court and you say, but the warrant, the warrants, there's no probable cause for the warrant. Look, let's question the warrant. That's how you defend yourself in court. This judge would have said, you can't question the warrant. You can't question the probable cause. If the police, in this case, if DCF and the sheriff's office said so, then it is. The standard that Larry Basford and Sheriff Tommy Ford have set is that DCF and the sheriff's office can just proclaim that they have taken your child. And Judge Wells says that's all they have to see. That's all they have to prove is that they said it. And Larry Basford tonight said out loud, who is he really defending? He wasn't defending the girl. He wasn't representing the girl. He was representing the threat to the girl. He just said that. That is incredible. Then he said law enforcement had a duty to keep the girl safe because the girl was in danger. It's the second thing that's unbelievable, because in the trial, the top sheriff's office supervisor, in this case, Lieutenant Jeremy Mathis, was asked on the witness stand, do you believe the girl was in danger? And do you know what he said? No. Under oath, in the courtroom, he said no. Larry Basford just said that they had to keep the girl safe from the perpetrator, but in the trial, the sheriff's office said she was not in danger. This is just amazing. Amazing. So, Tom Lewis did a damn good job with his questions, which raises a question for me. It signals to me, this is not something Tom Lewis or anybody who's been carrying the water for the cronies around here would do until recently, which signals to me that they might know something. Tom Lewis might know something. Tom Lewis, I'm not saying he felt safe, because clearly I could tell he was worried after he did that, because I am every day, all the time. If you criticize Larry Basford and Tommy Ford, they will surround your home or worse. But I'm almost wondering if the jig is up around here. I just don't see Tom Lewis doing that unless they are sniffing something out. Wow. Anyway, and the third, by the way, the third thing, this is brand new, unbelievable news. When they arrested that attorney, Hoot Crawford, the sheriff's office, under the advice of the state attorney, they were on the phone. The top cops were talking to the top prosecutor. The top prosecutor, who was going to be running against Hoot Crawford instead of Eric Garmon, said, yeah, arrest him. Well, according to all the testimony, the only people in the room with Larry Basford that day were 2 other prosecutors. But tonight, Larry Basford just said there was a third one in there. His predecessor, Glenn Hess. He just said Glenn Hess was in the room too. What? That's brand new. I've never seen that in any testimony in this case. And he arrested his rival, Greg Wilson, which you saw Tom Lewis surprisingly bring up. Massive election interference, massive violations of our right to an attorney. I mean, that was an incredible debate.
You want to look good? You want to look good? You want to feel good? Little John's Big and Tall is where it's at. Right across the street from Sky's Pizza Pie, 5700 North Davis Highway. You can find out more online at littlejohnsbigandtall.com. He's also a member of the iTex trading community, where your iTex dollars are welcome.
Listen, my hair's blown back. I am just like, woo! I cannot believe what I just saw. I'm gonna wrap it up. That's worth watching again, especially with the context that I just provided. I also, of course, want to thank the Unknown Patriot for sponsoring the show, and all of you who throw a tip in the tip jar as little as $5 a month by becoming a patron. Crowdfunding is a major way that I do this, and I could not do it without those of you who have continued to throw a tip in the tip jar. And I would be so grateful if you did as well. $5 a month for this, the best money you can spend on the internet. And you know this, man. Oh boy. Patreon.com/Bernie Thompson. That's how you can support my efforts with a tip. Patreon.com/Bernie Thompson. Okay, with that, I'm going to go look at your comments and catch my breath. Holy sh!